Welcome to the Business of Family, the podcast where we explore the stories, challenges, and opportunities of family businesses. I'm your host, Tammy Buss, and I'm a family business survivor, and I'm also a family business advisor. In this show, we'll be talking with family business leaders and experts to bring you insights and inspiration so you too can survive your family business journey. Whether you're a founder, a successor, a professional, or just curious about family business, this podcast is for you. Welcome. So today my guest is John Ursin. He is with Schenck. He's a managing partner and the chair of the firm's management committee. It was founded in 1912 as a two-person law firm from Morristown. Schenck has entered the second century of service as a firm of 80-plus attorneys, servicing virtually all legal needs of businesses and individuals. John is a corporate attorney with experience in a range of legal specialties, including extensive first chair litigation experience, risk management, and biochemistry. John counsels family business clients and speaks about the need for family business to have succession planning regardless of their exit strategy. So welcome, John.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about your firm. It started, 1912. That's a long time.
It is a long time, and law firms, when you're talking about succession planning, law firms aren't always very good at succession planning. So we're a little bit of the exception to the rule, and we're proud of it.
Yeah. Wow. And now, is there any family, just as a question, is there any family in the law firm?
No. So the law firm is probably a little bit different than the subject we're speaking about today, but oftentimes attempting to have your succession planning be family in a law firm is a bad idea.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah, because not
yeah.
too many times you see that happen, but I'm just thinking, wow, 1912, that's a long time for a
Yes,
firm to
sure
be
is.
around.
Sure is. We're proud of it.
Exactly. You should be. So let's dig into succession planning for family businesses. So you counsel family business clients on this. So tell me why this is such a critical topic for families.
Sure. So, I mean, I think it starts with generally my practice is almost all counseling families, family offices, and closely held businesses. And so, very frequently you find that the family business is the largest asset of the family. So, when
Mhm.
it's the largest asset, at some point, it either has to be monetized for value, monetized for retirement, or passed on through succession to either employees or family. And
Mhm.
that planning is complex, and as we're about to discuss, it needs to start early.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you find that this topic is more relevant today with the aging population and the boomers being 61, the youngest boomers?
Sure. I looked at some numbers, and in the 2021 census, 52% of business owners were over 55 years old, and 23% of business owners were older than 65. And
Hmm.
we know from other statistics that more than half of US businesses are fully family owned. So it really is a timely issue because it really is an aging issue.
Right. And is that something that you bring up as a law firm with clients who own businesses right from the get-go? Is like, what is your succession plan? Like if they're coming in for a different purpose?
Sure. When I think because of our expertise and our experience in counseling family businesses, we probably have a little bit different starting point in the discussion than most businesses. Typically, a person might come in and they're starting a business and they're very interested in the statistic that 65% of all new businesses fail within 10 years. So
Hmm.
when they come in, they want to know about what happens if the business fails. They want to know about personal guarantees. They want to know about LLCs and corporations to protect them from liability. But they never really think from day one about all the paths of how they're going to deal with success. And when the success comes, value comes, and then you have to deal with all of the issues that could impact that later.
Hmm. Hmm. And so being, in the industry that you're in and dealing with these family businesses, are you dealing a lot with mistakes that they've made, or are you trying to be the sort of the proactive and sort of help them prepare for any situation? Because I know as a lawyer, we tend to come to lawyers when there's a problem, right? Like we
Sure,
don't tend to go for preventative. We're like,
sure.
hey, John, we got a problem here. Help us out.
Of
What are you
course.
finding?
So it really is a mix. I think luckily because of the nature of our business, we're a little bit more proactive and we're dealing with clients on the planning side a little bit more. But we certainly get clients who come in who now have a problem and have now identified that there's going to be an issue with monetizing the business at some point, maintaining the value or passing it on. And, we in this area, you'll frequently hear a reference to the 5 Ds, right? The 5 Ds are death, disability, divorce, disagreement, and distress. So we would much prefer to meet people and work with them to plan for those situations because they're common,
Hmm.
rather than have people have one of those situations and come to us and have to try and work through it.
Right. And what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see that families make when it comes to succession planning?
I think the two things are simply not planning,
Not
because
planning is a plan, I think.
not planning is a mistake.
Yeah.
So I think that sometimes putting off the planning, I don't think people are unconscious of it. I think that they often think that they can worry about it later, and they're
I'm
busy
young, I
trying
don't have to
to.
worry about it.
Sure, they're trying to increase their sales, they're trying to increase their marketing, they're trying to expand to another market, and they'll worry about dealing with all the succession issues, the bad things that could happen. They'll worry about that later. So not planning is the major thing. But the second thing, specifically as it relates to closely held family companies, is being realistic. So, the generally the person who's created the business is very attached to it, very dedicated, almost laser focused on it. And then the person who created that business often wants to pass it on to the family, but they're often not realistic in either that being the goal or in their approach to it.
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. I think one of the things that I find as a family business advisor is that I'm brought in generally by second generation. First generation is so focused on the business. The kids are either, they feel that they're too young, they're not experienced, they don't do things the way they do it, that they're not really focused on the succession. And the second generation is concerned about what happens if.
Right,
What
right.
happens if the 4 or the 5 Ds, any of those things happen. And I've had a lot of clients say, Tammy, should I just go start my own business, my side business, like the same thing as what I'm doing now with mom or dad, because I don't know what's happening. And there's this whole issue around I'm in the business, my siblings are not, you know, that becomes a major issue. So what, for people listening today, if you've not started your succession planning, what's the first thing that you'd recommend that they do?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would recommend is create the team of advisors around you, right? So again, this is a place where I think entrepreneurs in the first and sometimes into the second generation are so busy with growing the business that they don't actively think about this. But oftentimes, the attorney for the business is somebody who did their residential real estate closing, right?
Yeah.
Who doesn't specialize in these issues. But you
Hmm.
could say the same thing about the accountant. The person who did your taxes at 25 may not be the right person to help you with succession planning, of an entrepreneur who's now 50 in their 50s or 60s. The same with your insurance agent.
Hmm.
The person who's insuring your house or perhaps your car might not be the one to insure your restaurant or your ice rink or your manufacturing facility. You need the right team around you that has experience in these issues to give you guidance when you get to these critical points. So I think forming the right team around you is a critical first step.
Yeah, I agree. But the problem is getting the first generation to do that. So in your experience, are you dealing with the first generation or is it second generation that's sort of prompting some of this documents and some of the succession planning?
Yeah, I think more often we are dealing with the first generation, but it's much more helpful when the second generation is involved. And I mentioned something before. One of the mistakes that people in this situation make is not being realistic. So I think a lot of first generation entrepreneurs who have grown a business, they have a dream that their three children are going to be involved in the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And very often one or two of them might have a genuine interest and dedication to that business, but rarely do all three. And
Yes.
finding the roles for those children and then working it out in the family is the difficult thing. So it's much better situation for us when the first generation walks through our door, has questions about what to do next, and seated around the table are the other stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. So start early is important. How do you get them to start early? I mean, if they're in talking to you again, they're first generation, like, yeah, I'll deal with that. I just need this little thing handled first. How do you actually get them to start to make decisions?
Yeah. So it's a great question, and it's really fundamental for us because when somebody comes in, they want the basics, they want to move fast, they want to get the business started, and they'll come in, they'll focus on the things I mentioned before. They'll come in, they'll focus on liability or the personal guarantee on the loan or things that affect them personally and might affect them if the business fails, in the first few years. What we do, though, is we speak to them about these issues and about what the planning can look like, and don't overwhelm them at the very inception of the business, but get them to commit to a periodic review so
Mm-hmm.
that as the business grows, as they're feeling more confident, they have their feet under them, they're moving from their first location to their second location, they've doubled in size. We're trying to get them to come back to us on a periodic basis, but certainly come in and review the whole structure of what you're doing at a minimum every 3 to 5 years. And entrepreneurs will react better to that. Because if
Yeah,
you
yeah.
try and over plan and over complicate the original structure and plan for every contingency, they'll often disconnect from the process because they don't think it's a good use of their time, or they find it too complicated or expensive. So get them in the door, make them aware of the issues, and then get them to commit to a periodic review as you go forward so that as the business grows, the plan can grow.
Hmm. Now, interesting you say about entrepreneurs. So one of the things I've noticed in my, 40-year career is that I find there's a difference between the entrepreneur and the accidental entrepreneur. And a lot of my clients are accidental entrepreneurs in that they started their business because they needed to put food on the table. Maybe they left their employer because of values, and you mentioned that a little bit earlier about values, and values are so important in business. So they leave their employer, they go out on their own. They're a plumber, electrician, home builder, framer, whatever they are. They leave because of the values. They start their own company. And lo and behold, 30 years later, they lift up their head and they have this business now. And they've been so focused on the business, they didn't intend to start it, to grow it, to sell it. And that's where I'm trying to reach out to these individuals and these business owners that potentially could be family businesses to say, look, it's time to start thinking about this. But again, it's the second gen. So do you come across that as well? And how do you start to get them? Because they're very much, head in the sand because they didn't intend to grow a business and they really don't know how to transition it or to exit it completely. And from my perspective, they want to do an estate plan or they want to do a will, but it's like, well, how do you know what you're doing yet with the business? How can you do your will till you know what's happening? So talk a little bit, tell me a little bit about that. If that happens in your
Yeah,
practice.
I think the phrase that you use is interesting because I do draw the distinction very sharply between the serial entrepreneur, right? Because the serial entrepreneur is easier for us to engage with because
Hmm.
they've gone through the cycles of building a business, selling a business, starting a new one. They're often involved in multiple businesses. They understand M&A, they understand exit strategies. Whereas the business owner that you're describing certainly doesn't. And very often we get connected to those people, those accidental entrepreneurs. We get connected to them accidentally. So, very often they will have a problem. They will come in, we'll solve the problem for them, we'll gain their trust, and then we'll start talking to them and saying, well, what is your next step and what are you planning? And that's a big expansion. Have you thought about a subsidiary? And then we talk about, whether their children are going to get involved and so forth. But there we we want to engage with them, but we often almost engage with them accidentally through some other event that causes them to come in. And one of the things that you described there is they very often don't really understand the value of the business that they have because they haven't had experience with M&A, they haven't had experience with capital markets. And when I described before that person comes in and they have a hope that one of the children will take over the business, we can really sit with that person and say, okay, well, that's one path. But by the way, there's another path where you sell. There's another path where you partially sell or involve. There's a path where you sell to the employees or you take on a partner. And once you start laying all that out for them, then they understand the complexity of it. And usually we can engage with them in good planning.
Because it's really in same with me in how I get introduced to clients is generally by accident or something's happening. And I think as advisors, which is really important, you said one of the key things is to build a really good team around you, is somebody's going to, the founder's going to come to one of those advisors for a specific purpose, whether it's an accounting issue, a legal issue, an estate issue. And then at that point is if you have a really good team around you, you can say, hey, you know what, John, I think you should go talk to John because I noticed you don't have a shareholders agreement between your son and yourself or your daughter. And how does that look from an estate perspective? So I think it's really key what you said about building the team around you, because I think entrepreneurs who set out to grow a business to sell it really understand the business dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of these families that I'm working with are accidental and they just have this really great business. And I don't know if you agree with me on this, but a lot of times I think they feel that they really don't know, so they don't want to ask.
Right.
I'm really not, I didn't go to business school. All I know is how to be a really good plumber, and I've got really good team members around me. And, Susie's been doing the books for 35 years and she still uses, pen and paper. It's a very hard evolution. And how do you talk them out of that? Or what do you do to help these families plan for their succession?
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. They don't understand all the paths as I described before because there's multiple. And when they come in, sometimes they've fallen in love with this idea of intra-family succession, right? And so once you describe all the different paths to them, then we can really work through what's going to work best for them, how they will provide for their children, how they will provide for their grandchildren, and you can get them to move in a certain direction. But we frequently have somebody come in and say, it turns out that my son or daughter, we got them involved in the business and it's just not working out and I don't know what to do now. And, and that's where, talking to them about, do they have key employees who could buy them out, or are they interested in selling to a larger competitor, and then going through those processes. But for the accidental entrepreneurs you describe it, the discussions often come up accidentally. And then, as their advisors, we really have to seize that opportunity to give them a broader understanding of where they are and what the potential outcomes are.
Mm-hmm. And so when you're dealing with these clients, are you just really discussing with them, shareholder agreements between the kids in the family, not in the family? You're talking about estate planning. Do you put this as part of the whole succession strategy when you're talking to clients, that it's more than just selling the business or, selling it to your child, but there's these agreements that need to be in place because of, as you mentioned, the 5 Ds?
Sure, it has to be. It can't. Their estate planning, their retirement plans, the kids' career aspirations, they all have to fit together. So often there will be a dynamic when the kids enter the business that will change the buy-sell agreement. We'll add more key person insurance so that they have some continuity ability. Once more than one child is involved, we'll make sure that it's going to work well between them as a partnership. And then the other thing, we kind of started this discussion and we referenced that this is an aging issue. More and more, we're finding that we're using trusts as a transition tool because mom and dad are in their late 70s. They're less involved in the business. They still want some income from the business, but the two younger siblings are now running the business and they want assurances that they're going to inherit the business. They have control of the business. They can make the decisions in the business. And we often are using a trust as a bridging mechanism, to accommodate all those considerations.
So for our listeners, can you describe a little bit how you could use a trust?
Sure. So, you have a situation where, and I'll use the exact situation I just described. If mom and dad are 78, approaching 80, and they're still counting on X amount of income from the business, that's fine with the two people who are now running the business, the two children who are running the business. But what they're concerned about is as they age, and you worry about their memory, their mind slipping, their motivation. And so here are two children who have dedicated 10 years to the business, are growing it, are providing the income to mom and dad, but all of a sudden they're worried that mom and dad might have a change of heart, might sell the business out from under them, might include a different child who's not participating in the business in the future. And so the trust mechanism allows you to put in place a structure where all the parties, as grantors, trustees, beneficiaries to the trust, have all agreed on what the structure will be going forward, frankly, who will get what, and then what will happen when mom and dad are no longer around. And so it brings certainty to a transition period that can be very helpful.
Mm-hmm. And so the trust would be for example, just the operating company. So the shares of the operating company.
Yeah, so typically we're more focused on the shares of the operating company. Very often these businesses also have real estate. There's tax considerations in the real estate being included in the parent's estate because you get the stepped up basis, which can be very valuable. But typically it's more focused on control of the operating entity, distribution of the income as you go, and who will take over when mom and dad are no longer there.
And when it's a transition within the family, or you're hoping to keep it in the family, using a trust is one thing. Do you use estate freezes?
We do from time to time. It all depends on the age and the dynamic, and certainly that brings up a situation where some of the children are participating in the business and some are not, and that can be a tool that is useful so that you don't have any tension or disagreements among the children, because
Right.
very often the two children who have dedicated 10 years to the business, all of a sudden, as mom and dad are approaching a certain age, the third or fourth child often says, I might be interested in the business too. Boy, that business is making a lot of money. How do I get involved? What's my share, right?
Right. Yeah. And there's so much when you look at transition, succession, exit, whatever you want to call it, because there's the legal, the control perspective, there's the tax perspective. Do you give it now? Do you give it later? What are the consequences on, from an estate equalization? What are you trying to do? It's so complex. And one of the things that I really stress with working with clients is the three-circle model from Harvard that, the family, the business, and the ownership, and being able to tear them apart so that you can see that this is a business role and responsibility versus this is an ownership role and responsibility. And I think as a first generation, we don't have a lot of governance. In fact, we don't even know what governance really is. It's only when it goes down the line that it gets past the first, the second, maybe into the third, that you really start looking at governance, because the transition might go from mom and dad to 3 kids, but then it's going to go from 3 kids to 9 kids, or 8 kids. Like, how do you do that? And I think that's why the numbers are so low for those transitions. It's already low from first to second, but second to third is really tiny, about 3 or 4%. And I think it's because of the complexity, right? And I think our role as advisors to family businesses to help educate them on succession planning and when to start. I think that's key. So let's talk about some wins. We talk about what's kind of, okay, you got to start early. We know that as advisors, we know that. We just have to get that across to the clients. But if you have either a first generation listening to this podcast or a second generation, what are some quick wins you can get to get them moving? Whether you get the second gen to get a quick win with first, or first to start. What is it? What are some tips?
Well, it's very hard to answer the question without saying, start your planning and start early, right? So,
No.
but your question references the fact that people are going to be resistant in the beginning to over planning. So, we want them to contact their advisor and come in and have essentially a checkup, right? The business is growing. Here's the direction it's going in. Does my operating agreement, my shareholder agreement, does that accomplish what I want, right? Then we'll look and say, the business is growing. It's more valuable. You're moving in the right direction. Is it properly insured, right? Is it and properly insured for liability issues and properly insured to account for key people, both in the family and other employees. But the other thing that we'll talk to them about in the situation you describe is, we haven't really touched on this today. Are you in succession planning? It assumes that this business is going to have continuity, that it has value, that it's going to grow. Are you fostering the right culture and having the right constraints in the business to maintain that value, to be able to pass it down to your children or whoever you choose as your successors? And that's a much more dynamic question, right? But equally important. So you have a business, you have 3 key employees. Have you locked them up? Are you really paying them enough? Do they have non-competes where that's allowed anymore?
Yeah, that's a tough one. There's not that many. You can't do that much anymore.
Have you tied them up so that the business will continue so that you can pass it down or realize its value? But I think the answer to your question, the quick wins are a checkup on your structural governance documents. That's a quick win because that conversation is going to yield something. It's going to yield a tune-up to those documents. It's going to yield a thought about connecting them to your estate documents, or it's going to yield a thought where you need to go speak with your insurance broker or your tax advisor and do something slightly differently. So I think the concept of a checkup with your advisor is the quickest way, the best way to get a win in that you're heading in the right direction.
I love that. I love that. Well, believe it or not, we're out of time. That goes fast.
It does.
So what I always like to end with is 3 key takeaways about succession planning that you could leave with our listeners. So your sort of top 3 pieces of advice.
So, I'm at the risk of being redundant. It is don't wait, start yesterday, but tomorrow will do.
Yeah.
That's number 1.
Today. Don't wait till tomorrow.
That's right. The second thing is to really try to be realistic with respect to your goals, thoughts, desires, and whether or not they are properly coordinated with your child's thoughts, desires, commitment, aspirations. And in that analysis, are you really considering all the available paths? Don't fall in love with leaving the business to one of your children when the better thing to do would be to sell the business and put the money in a trust for your next 2 generations. That's the second thing. And the third thing is the most important, and that is work with the correct team. really get the right references, make sure it's a team that will work with you and not kill you when you're small and growing, but has the sophistication to help you through the lifespan of the business.
I love that. And you know what? I love the fact the collaboration with the other, disciplines. The problem is getting them to collaborate. You know,
Yes.
that's
Yes.
the biggest problem. We all say that, but everybody's a little scared to, pass on a client. So I'm glad that is one of your top tips and it's the most important. And I agree that if we all work together for the betterment of the client, it's a win-win for everybody. Like, I love that. I love
Agreed.
that. Anyway, thank you so much for coming in, John. If people want to reach out to you or find you, where would they be able to do that?
The easiest way is through our website, and that is www.spsk.com, SchenkPriceSmithandKing.com, and we're here in New Jersey, serving New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania, but we work all over the country.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for having me.
If you like this episode, subscribe to the Business of Family podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can also find Blue Roots on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. On the next show, I'll be back with another amazing guest who will inspire you with their family business insights. Until then, take care and keep it in the family. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, tax, investment, or insurance advice. Before acting on any advice, please contact your personal or company advisors.